This is Impact 10 for Movies That Matter, the series highlighting the movies that helped change the world. Today's topic is the movies that taught us to be afraid. I'll be joined by Stacy, Lexy, Garret, and Christopher, and we'll be talking about not your typical scary movies, but the movies that help touch and highlight our deepest fears.
Hey friends, it's Lexy, back for another episode of Impact 10, this time not your typical fear. And for this category, I chose the film Spotlight. And the movie Spotlight follows around the Boston Globe's Spotlight team as they investigate and eventually break a really big story on the pedophilia by priests going on in the Catholic Church. The original article that this movie focuses on was released in 2002, but the movie came out a little over 10 years later in 2015. And I chose this movie because, as I was watching it, it really made me scared because of the way that people in power can abuse that power and how they can affect the lives of others. In this case, the priests, molested, raped, and committed these sex crimes against children, which is very frightening. And they were able to use their power in the church and sort of as this figure of the church to gain the trust of these families and also to groom these children. And what's also so scary is that throughout the film, you follow the journalists as they try and break this story and uncover evidence. And they have a really hard time actually getting evidence because, there's just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Documents are sealed. And it's because the church is so rooted in the community, they have a lot of power, both, over the families and legally, unfortunately. What's also really scary is that the story is not made up. It's based on real events. Real people were affected by this. And to the film's credit, they do it sort of in a very, I think, documentary style, where as you're watching it, you remember that it's real, that this is real life and real incidents happening to real people, which is just all very scary to me that this, can happen and go under the rug for so long. What's also scary is that even though I have, no personal connection to the Catholic Church, there are abusers everywhere. There are people in power everywhere who can use and abuse that power. One of the lines in the film is Mark Ruffalo, who plays the reporter Michael Resendez. And he says, it could have been any of us. And that's true. We have people in power throughout our lives that, could take advantage of that and hurt us, unfortunately. And this film was just another reminder of that. And also upon rewatch, I was thinking back to the Harvey Weinstein case. And while it's not the exact same situation, I thought there were parallels, especially in the case of if someone does want to come forward and try and get justice for an act that's been committed against them, they're typically told by lawyers to settle, which was the case in a lot of the Harvey Weinstein cases and also the case for a lot of these children. And it's made to seem like it's for the victims, so they don't have to deal with the whole, trial and court procedure. But it really just, silences the victims and let the abusers get away without having to really change anything in their daily lives. And I think there's a big impact on the film. It won the impact by the film. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And then, sort of brought this issue back again to the forefront over 10 years later. Sasha Pfeiffer, one of the reporters, was quoted saying, "I think there's still work to do," which is important and good that a film brought this issue to the national attention again. I'll see you guys in the broader discussion. Look forward to talking with other co-hosts.
Hello. My name is Christopher Robinson. Terminator 2 Judgment Day debuted in 1991 when I was 9 years old, and I saw it with my family in the theaters, which was wonderful. I was a 9-year-old going to see a R-rated film, but it was an R-rated film that was marketed for a mass family appeal. which it was. To give you a little breakdown about how revolutionary Terminator 2 was, it broke all the standing box office records for opening weekend, or how much domestic money, or worldwide. It revolutionized CGI in film, and it made James Cameron to be a household name. It was, at the time of its creation, it was the most expensive movie ever made. And as you can know from James Cameron, he's made a lot of movies that have had that designation that continue to be huge successes. But what stuck with me is not just for its impact on action movies, but its impact on fear, and the fear of AI, or artificial intelligence. Now, for people who don't know what Terminator 2 is about, the Terminator series is about AI comes back from the future to wipe out the leader of humanity, human resistance, before he even is born or while he's a child. Terminator 2 is while he is a child. Now, there's been a lot of movies about the fear of AI, but I think Terminator 2 made it mainstream. We still make Skynet jokes about the computer's going to try to kill us, or Alexa's coming for us. And you can see right now, there is some kind of truth in that. We're not worried about the computers killing us now. It's just computers are now being used by corporations to collect tons of data on us. Sometimes without our consent, or it is without our consent, but not our actual knowledge of what we're doing. No one reads the term of service, or how many things are collecting data, like Zoom collects data, or like Alexa, Amazon, or our favorite big brother, Google, all collecting data on result of the algorithm, some type of computer program that will collect our data and try to figure out what is best for us. And that's been a long-lasting fear. I think there's two parts of the fear for AI. One is the creation of something that will overcome us, or we create something better than ourselves that will, like evolution, take over its rightful place because we created the ways of destroying ourselves. Another part of the fear that at least I think about with AI is having a subservient, sentient being, or a subservient being becoming sentient. And there's a huge history in humanity about us exploiting sentient beings, or exploiting people who are servants, and trying to deny their humanhood and the right to be able to determine their life and to determine what they want to do. So those two things really made me scared of AI when I was 9 years old. And also, having T-1000 chasing right down at you, coming to go, and stab, was cool, but terrifying. So I just wanted to say that I still scared of computers. I still don't like the idea of Facebook following everything I'm doing, and us humans trying to create new life, and in the up getting us all annihilated because hubris. Thank you, and I look forward to the general discussion about our fears.
So the movie I chose for this is Get Out. Written and directed by Jordan Peele. The movie came out in 2017, and go back and listen to our episode on it. I think I gave it an impact score of 9, so hindsight's always 20/20. But in retrospect, the effect Get Out had on the movie industry and on America writ large has been phenomenal. So while the movie is a more traditional horror film, what's interesting about what that movie did as a horror film was make accessible for white or non-Black audiences the fear that Black people have of white spaces. Now, obviously this is something Black people knew, but it's something that other people have tried to do in other movies. But I think having it be a horror movie for Get Out really was the way to make this accessible to white audiences, especially because the movie didn't have a white audience surrogate. Pretty much every white person in the whole movie was bad. So You were solidly in the perspective of Chris. You were following it through his journey, and you were feeling what he was feeling. And that was kind of revolutionary in its own way. And what the movie did for the explosion of Black filmmakers was unprecedented. I mean, I've said it on other episodes of Movies That Matter that, we are seeing the beneficial effect. We are seeing the diversity that Get Out created by being so popular and being so successful. Not to mention having a horror movie win an Oscar, which is also, it's not completely landmark, but it is very unusual. And then I think the contribution that the movie made and what really gives it its impact 10 is, the Black Lives Matter movement had started earlier than Get Out. Get Out is solidly in the middle. And here we are in 2020, and there are massive protests. And the protests are not completely fueled by Black people. There are a lot of white people who have taken to the streets and protested in support of Black Lives Matter. And now, I'm not going to, overstate Get Out's case, and I'm not going to tell you that this is solely because of Get Out. But I do think the movie unquestionably contributed to the moment that we're in by very much sparking a conversation about white spaces, about white liberal complicity in white supremacy. And I just don't think, again, many pieces make this up and many people work for years to bring us to this moment. But I think that we are not here without the contribution that Get Out made to really allowing white audiences to live the perspective of Chris in this movie. So that's why I think Get Out really deserves its place in not only film history, but in a very important movie that changed people's consciousness about white supremacy.
Hi, I'm Garret, and today, for my Impact 10 horror movie, I'm going to be talking to you about the 2009 movie Coraline. I know, how on par for me to do a children's movie. But I think Coraline really sticks out as an Impact 10 movie for several reasons. First, Coraline was one of the stop-motion pictures that really changed the way we viewed stop-motion. We hadn't seen a movie like this since The Nightmare Before Christmas, and it completely changed the field of how stop-motion existed and how we base movies in stop-motion today. Coraline is the third largest ranking stop-motion movie to ever have gross profit, followed behind Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run. So those kind of darker stop-motion movies are what people really seem to enjoy and what they want to see in theaters. And so Coraline really took stop-motion to a new level because it brought us into a real horror genre. But not just a genre that was horror because it was stop-motion, a genre that was digestible for children. It was a horror movie based around a young girl who she's just moved from Michigan to Oregon while her parents are publishing a gardening book. And she's all alone and she has to discover this big new house, and it's like already kind of that creepy village and setup. But the way that they did this movie was in a giant warehouse, and they had 50 subsection plots that they would go and film these stop motion scenes in. And that was unheard of at the time, to have an entire warehouse dedicated to a stop motion movie. Now that's how almost all stop motion movies are done, because what they would do is they would build sets, take them down, build them, take them down. With Coraline, they were able to have a warehouse full of these sets. And in that stop motion industry, that's huge, because that means you could go back and reshoot set films continuously until you were pleased. But also you could go back and use those edits for other additions, such as special features, extended scenes. So it was a really unique experience. But Coraline speaks out also because it made horror digestible for children. And kids were able to talk about some really hard issues that Coraline brought up. First and foremost would be that Coraline really focuses on wanting to have a better existence of what she already has. She feels ignored by her parents. She doesn't feel like she's very supported and she's very cared for. So she goes into an opposite realm where there is a better mother and a better father, But that also allows her to have the best of whatever she wants. In this world, she can create the best version of food, the best version of entertainment, the best version of what she wants to do. At first, she really likes the idea, but then we come to find out that, maybe because something appears to be better doesn't mean it actually is. And I think that's why it kind of sticks out as, in my mind, one of the top horror movies. It really helped children digest that, they can always dream of wanting something better. Kids are always going to want a better mom, a better dad, a better existence. But what they don't realize is be careful what you wish for, because you might actually get it. But at what price? The price is kind of giving up part of yourself and realizing that you can't have everything that you've always wanted. So I think one of the most interesting parts about Coraline, while it is very horror-esque and, amazing soundtrack on this movie, but the very physical representation of blinding yourself and a metaphorical representation of blinding yourself, because to stay in the perfect world, Coraline must give up her sight. And in this movie, sight represents her ability to see things for what they truly are and to care. And so to give up her sight, she has to literally sew buttons into her eyes. And to do so really takes a physical representation of plucking out the thing that you need and taking it away from you, taking one of your senses, robbing you of it. And that was a really unique, powerful moment for a lot of horror genres, because we see people want to take your senses away all the time, but you have to willingly give up your sense. It's a whole different ballgame. I think Coraline really impacted the world in ways that we'll never know for stop motion, but it definitely set a field of this is the standard of stop motion that we're going to do. It won a ton of awards. It really kind of set the pace for what stop motion movies are. And that's why I chose Coraline. And I really hope that you guys can watch it. Coraline, 2009, excellent horror movie, fun for the whole family, great discussion starter.
Hey there, it's Stacy. My selection for the Impact 10, Not Your Typical Fear, is Silence of the Lambs. I won't do any Hannibal Lecter impressions, I promise. But I do want to put this film up as being one of the best horror films, suspense horror films ever made. But on top of that, being just a really influential film, both in how female characters were portrayed afterwards, but also just being really friggin' scary. And it taught me to be afraid of things. I had never thought about, at that point, as a teenager watching this film for the first time, realizing that it was a very real threat that my boss might come on to me one day. Not having ever worked in an office, watching Clarice Starling get either asked out by a coworker or told she's attractive by her boss and just really leered at, and it's so uncomfortable. I remember thinking, is he allowed to do that? Is that something that's going to happen a lot? And so that was eye-opening for me. And then also afterwards, I think the having your skin worn as a coat, became something that it became part of the kind of societal, American societal references for the dangers of dating. Essentially, you could go on this date with this guy you don't know that well that just asked your number on the street corner, but he might cut you into pieces. You just don't know. And now it's online dating, right? You kind of go, all right, well, that guy seems nice, and we texted back and forth a few times, but he might just be, planning to throw me down a well and hose me and turn my skin into a coat. So those were all things that I had not really considered before I watched the film, and that I did kind of take with me after that. It's a great film. It's so beautifully made and acted. It won all the top 5 awards at the Oscars that year, and is one of only 3 or 4 films to do so. It really changed how women were portrayed in film. So Clarice Starling is widely considered one of the or the first truly feminist female protagonist. She's not just some, badass ass kicker that implausibly punches guys out who are twice her size with like a little arm. She's truly strong and truly brave and really smart, and has agency. And so that's what makes that character in that film special, I think. In addition to exploring the whole spectrum of misogyny, going everywhere, everything from sort of the subtle, everyday microaggressions against women towards all the way to being thrown down a well and having your skin turned into a coat. So that's why I chose it, and it's one of the few films I consider to have true impact 10. So Silence of the Lambs, everybody.
Welcome back, everybody, to the discussion portion of Not Your Typical Fear. We've all had a chance to watch the videos and hear the discussion, so here we go.
I'll give my usual. I always drop this about horror films just because I didn't grow up enjoying them. It was not, especially slasher films, not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I have learned to appreciate, specific genres, and even more so in recent years, the ability of a horror film to tackle social issues. And I think it's really the only genre that does it outside of, Oscar bait documentary stuff, like actual movies that people actually watch. It's usually a horror film delving into these things that we're going to talk about, because I think it's because it's the only genre that you're specifically going into knowing / wanting to be uncomfortable. It's like, this is going to be an unpleasant experience. So it doesn't have the same pressure other genres have to like keep you happy and make you feel good at the end. Like, you're going in ready to tackle uncomfortable feelings. And so lately, especially with movies like Get Out, is a great one. Split. There's a couple coming out soon. A Promising Woman.
Yeah.
Right. Where they're just like, we're getting into this. And actually it works within the genre.
Yeah. I would agree. I think horror gives us a way to digest probably subconscious feelings and thoughts that we have that we may not want to approach and talk about willingly. And I think it's a really unique situation, because you can see things that are like suspense and horror, like Parasite, that was wonderfully, a movie that really impacted, but it made us uncomfortable to think about some of the consequences and things that could actually go on in the world. And so I think you're right on, Stacy, that horror gives us that opportunity to really process things that are uncomfortable to talk about in a digestible format.
See, I was thinking too, sorry, Christopher, that the way all of these movies function is that they're all really good about putting you into that character's shoes and then letting you experience the horror that they're going through. Like, I remember in Spotlight, Lexy, like that one parent is like, I can't sit on this, like, I can't handle this, like I can't handle having this information, and his struggle with it. And I think one of the things I think it does really well is put you in that character's mindset, and you feel those feelings. And I don't know, I think to Stacy's point, it lets you have all of that emotion, but in a digestible chunk, right? We're going to feel terrible for 2 hours and then it'll be over, and it allows you to confront feelings you may not necessarily like, although people love horror films, and then know that you can go back to regular life.
I guess I see it differently, because I can honestly say I have never been a horror film fan at all. Don't need it. I mean, I guess I qualify, but I'm kind of cheating, because I would say they're thrillers. So that's probably why it is, because I guess when I feel movies, I never feel afraid, but I feel more like entertained. I guess I find that entertaining. I find that you can sometimes feel that feeling of dread, but it's still kind of fun. I mean, I guess that's probably why the ones in the horror genre, that movies that I like in the horror genre, would be the ones that are more actiony or more like action movies or just horror comedies. Because yeah, I mean, the real world's scary enough. I don't need to add anything else. So
Yeah, and I think in terms of feeling things as you're watching movies, we might have brought this up in our planning for this episode, but I think unfortunately sometimes movies make you feel things more than real life events can do sometimes, because there's the music, and a good movie will put, certain scenes back to back, and hopefully an informative but also quite in an emotional way, and it makes you sort of feel for these people more than you might in real life. And even though it's not the same thing as reading like a newspaper article, it can still be a great way to push forward social issues, push forward a new way of thinking that sometimes real life doesn't always do, unfortunately.
right.
Sure, and
Yeah,
also you get to know the characters, right? Like they're actual people that you feel like you know.
Yeah.
and I think it's interesting because I know people who hate fiction. Like they're like, it's not real, so why would I bother with this? They like
It sounds so sad.
documentaries or
You're
read
missing
nonfiction
like
books.
everything.
I know. It truly breaks my heart, but I think I'm a bit dumbfounded because I'm like, but it's more real. Like I said in my piece about Get Out, and there's just a lot of things when you're like, you can read a story about it, you can see a documentary, and you can think that's happening over there to those other people. But when you go through Get Out and Chris's perspective as a white person, it's so much realer to you what he's going through than anything I could show you about whoever crazy people watched 8 minutes of George Floyd died. Because like that's too real. That's the other thing too, is like I don't need to watch somebody die like ever in real life. Like that's upsetting. And I need the veneer of fiction to protect myself.
And I think that
Agreed.
and I think that's where horror does a really good job of becoming something that makes it digestible. Because horror doesn't mean gore necessarily. I think they've become synonymous in the last 10 years, especially. But horror movies used to be like more psychological thrillers, things that like made you think, your stomach turn, your shoulders clench, like, oh my gosh, I'm on the edge of my seat. But I don't need to see all the gore and death with it to feel those things as well. You can feel fear and not have to like see blood dripping off of the walls every minute of every day. And so, but at the end of the day, you get to go home and be done with it. Like you never have to watch that movie again if you don't want to. You never have to engage with it. But now horror is pushing the limit to be like, no, I want you to engage with this. I want you to go home. I want you to talk about this. I want you to, spotlight. Like we need to talk about this. This is a huge deal that happened in our country that people didn't even know until that movie came out. Like it baffled me how many people had no idea that like things like that were going on. Or when we're talking about Get Out and racial inequality, or Silence of the Lambs, there are actual predators and creepy people out there, or even with the AI and Big Brother, like these things are things that we need to be thinking about, but it doesn't mean that like horror used to like push the envelope as much as I feel like it does now. And I'm really kind of intrigued to see what it's going to start pushing as we enter a new decade.
I mean, we're kind of living through our own horror movie right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think horror goes in cycles. I mean, there's things that are popular at certain times and things that are not popular. There was like we had the slasher films in the 80s, and then we had the torture porn in the early 2000s. So I think it goes through cycles. I mean, like one of I guess, like I said, it's always weird. Why am I being so hard on the word horror? But I guess like The Birds is considered a horror film, and it's still really, really good. And it has a great feeling of tension throughout the entire thing.
My husband is afraid of pigeons to this day.
But I just think it does reflect, but I agree with you guys that it does reflect our current fears at that point in time. like when we're afraid of being kidnapped and snatched, or um, fear of uh, fear of being taken over or replaced, like the pod people, or just like fear of the AI and the computers finally coming up as the computer revolution started to happen during during the 80s, going to the Terminator movies. So
Yeah, for this Halloween season this month, I've been trying to go back and watch some of the classic horror films that I've spent my life avoiding. And some are just fantastic, like
yes,
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing from Another World. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about the 50s, 1956, and then the 1951 Thing from Another World are just, I mean, they are fire. And you're right, you're absolutely right. They reflect like the fears at the time. Fast forward to, you mentioned the slasher films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I think we can argue like kind of kicked off that genre. It got banned like all over the place when it was first released. But like going back and watching it now, you can see it. There's so much of it is Vietnam. Like so much is like PTSD, like vets coming back shell shocked and a little weird, and just watching young people one by one go into this environment and just get massacred. Like all that sort of, like, people were dealing with that, and this movie took off. And I think that's why, like, people needed a way to process what they were seeing in the news, what they were seeing, like their neighbor's kid like go off and just either get obliterated or come back in a wheelchair. Like they needed something to help them work through it, and that movie did. I think that's my idea anyway.
I agree. And I think it's funny, like, we've had debates about what qualifies as horror, and it's really hard to draw a line, so I'm not going to try. We could spend the whole rest of this discussion trying to do that, and it would be boring. But it's like, I like a good, like, tense suspense thing. I don't like the gore, and I don't like, I guess, like, I mean, Garret was there when I came out of Midsummer because I had to, like, be around people. I was grown. I was literally sick to my stomach. I was so upset. And I think that it's like the good ones, and especially the good ones, because I mean, I will say at the end of the day, I can't be sorry I saw Midsummer, because I thought the cinematography and the editing was absolutely brilliant. Just brilliant. One of the best I saw that year. Or you take The Shining, a Kubrick masterpiece, or the Hitchcock films, and you're like, the technical elements then do, a well-made movie is going to stick with you and sink into your being a lot better than a poorly made one. And so it's, I know there's been a lot of talk about, getting shunned at the Oscars and quote unquote genre films and all that stuff. But I do wonder that if they're going to start to have their day where you just can't ignore the quality of the films that are coming out.
Well, I mean, like you said, Parasite, and we had Get Out, things like, I think they're actually starting to look into it. And I mean, I think that the things are changing, and it's kind of funny because, like, Alfred Hitchcock never won an Oscar, right?
I believe that's so, yes.
Yeah. So like it was never considered serious, and maybe it's moving towards that people are taking this thing seriously now. Because it is thought provoking.
It's thought provoking, and again, I think one of the interesting things is, I mean, it's so popular, right? Blumhouse is printing money.
Well, they make it really, really cheap. That's the important thing about making good movies. Make it really, really cheap.
But not necessarily poor quality.
Oh, no, not poor quality. But I mean, right. It's just the whole thing is that it's always amazing about when people have limited budgets, they actually can excel on films. And it's also cool to see that happen. And doing different things differently, or taking little twists and things, like I think Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2, about this whole trying to make a Groundhog Day murder mystery.
I didn't see it. I didn't know that was the premise. But yeah, so there, they make money partly because they are able to make them cheaply, and then people watch, enough people watch them that they have a really healthy profit margin. And I think Stacy, that you're right. Like, we are living in somewhat terrifying times, no more so than facing this election and in a pandemic. I'm personally quite worried about white supremacist violence were Trump to lose.
I mean, it's gonna happen anyway. I've been worried about white supremacist violence since forever, and people keep forgetting about Oklahoma City. And it's just, yeah. I mean, there probably, if Trump loses, there probably will be a spat of violence, and I would not be surprised by it. But I really don't. Well, let's not get into the politics. The world is kind of in a really, really not a great place right now. At least the United States is in not a great place. Yeah, that's like that. I mean, I remember I watched, like, I can watch depressing shows. I love watching depressing shows. They can make me feel better. That's what me and Kama my wife loved to watch those, but I had to stop watching after this, after 2016. I had to stop watching Attack on Titan. I don't know if anyone knows about the anime. It's as dark as all get up. Because, like I said, like, you know what? Real world kind of not so cool right now. I don't need that much nihilism in my fantasy right now.
So I think that both your points were trying to be like, horror movie's not something I want to get into all of a sudden because real world is scarier than what I can see on the TV, right? Like what's coming out in theaters. But I think we use horror movies as like fables to warn people and to like bring issues to things that aren't as prevalent as maybe we think. Like, I mean, how many of us thought that when we went away to camp, somebody was going to come and kill us or slaughter us? Or how many times did we think that we were going to get kidnapped? Like, I think that at some level, horror movies are meant to be fable teachers that, like, you know, here's something that happens, be aware of it, and then horror takes it to the extreme, right? And then we see multiple times where this happens versus, you know, there aren't really that many mass massacres. There aren't people get kidnapped every day, don't get me wrong, but not as much as like we are led to believe. And, you know, there's some terrible people in the world, but like I think horror kind of tries to push the envelope to be like, one, a teacher, be like, this could happen. This is the worst that could happen. So just be alert and be cautious because we don't want to end up there. So how do you stop it before we get to there? And I think that's what kind of fiction horror is trying to do, is trying to be like, don't let it get to this point.
Right.
Take the lessons that we've learned from this movie or this media and change. What are you going to bring about change and how?
Or even like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is kind of like that. Like it never explicitly says which group that they're, you know, which ideology they're concerned about, but they are kind of pointing out, hey guys, get a lid on this, because once the pod people take over, you know, the Electoral College cannot save you.
Well, also for topical ones, there was that, I feel like in the mid 2010s, there was also sort of a wave of horror movies about like online presence and like, you know, ones being filmed through the screen of your computer and sort of like what you put out online and how that can affect you in real life. And so that's sort of trying to teach people again about technology safety, but also being topical with a fear that people were afraid of at the time, because like Facebook and, you know, all these social media platforms getting so popular every day.
Yeah, I was going to say though, like kind of bringing it back to the like sort of catharsis element of horror movies, like most of the time they do have happy endings, right? Most of the time the enemy is defeated or the scary monster, or the woman is rescued from the pit after valiant efforts to rescue herself.
Yep.
Favorite victim ever. So I think it serves the function of letting us have hope and believe that in fact there's going to be a way out. And I know, like, controversially, Get Out was not supposed to have it was supposed to have a happy-ish ending.
I remember, like, was it 90s or 80s, the whole thing, like when you could have the happy ending when the hero sacrifices themselves, but they die at the end. What was it? Arnold Schwarzenegger's, was it not 7 Days, but when he was fighting Satan? You guys remember that one? And he
I'm
sacrificed.
surprised you're not bringing up your selection.
Oh, I mean, he doesn't. Yeah, he's a robot.
He sacrifices himself, right?
Yeah, but I mean, Terminator 2, he's a robot, so he dies, and I'm okay with that.
But I think what I really enjoy about horror is that you get to see the horror that the characters have to overcome, like themselves, and something that may have been fearful to them turns out to be something that saves their life. So a good example of that is like in Get Out, something that was really tragic to Black people was picking cotton, right? Like, but to survive, he had to pick the cotton out of the chair to survive.
Right.
And like something that was like a huge fear and cultural awareness, like they reclaimed power back. And I thought that was like a really cool thing to see, like a character get to experience horror, something horrific, and have to get that to better themselves. And I thought that was a most brilliant way to kind of show that you can overcome fear, and fear can actually turn into a motivator for you in a positive manner. Like Spotlight and Coraline, I both think share a commonality that like there were real issues that people wanted to talk about but didn't have access to do. I mean, Spotlight was like both relate around children, and I think it was an interesting. I know a lot of parents who have like watched Spotlight with their children and kind of like explain like, this is, we don't want this happening to you. If somebody's doing this to you, please speak up. But I just remember watching Spotlight in the theater and being paralyzed with fear, even though I'd known the story 10 million times over, just because of how well the writing was. But like sitting there looking at their faces while they're drafting the editorial, like you can just see that they're like, what's going to happen to us? Is this going to be the end of us as we know it? We're trying to blow this lid off the story, but it also could mean that we can never write for anybody ever again. And again, that overcoming that fear and kind of using it as a motivator, like for the greater good, the trolley situation. I'm going to write this piece because it needs to be written. I'm going to do this investigation. And yeah, I think it just sometimes is really interesting that horror itself has a way of transforming not only how we think, but our behaviors and actions into positive outcomes, which I don't know that a lot of other movies do.
No, I think on the other side of that coin is that a lot of times horror films give us like a worst case scenario of what we could become.
Right.
Say if we don't make those right choices. So like I think Nicole mentioned The Shining. I think there's a few other films like that where just kind of the dad of the family loses it and just kills everybody because he's in a cabin too long usually. Hashtag COVID. Yeah. But it's I think there's those opportunities as well. Like sometimes we get to see, all right, it's scary, but if you do the right thing, ultimately it'll be better for everyone. Even if you have to sacrifice something. And sometimes it's we're shown, here's what happens if you don't. Like you become a monster.
Yeah. I am sad we didn't spend a little more time on Silence of the Lambs, because I feel like that really was something that people still talk about today, scaring the crap out of them. But it's not something that is going to happen to very many people. And that was interesting. Like, most of the others could happen to a wide variety of people, but Silence of the Lambs is like, it's not. I'm
hoping Get Out doesn't happen to a wide variety of people.
I think like racial inequality and racial injustice and stuff, but like Silence of the Lambs, it's going to be like, very rare.
Most people are not going to get eaten.
Right. Or be stalked by like a serial murderer, like,
Well, yeah.
Right. There are people who do have that, sure, but like, it's more, so I think that's why Silence of the Lambs was so scary, is because to know that there are people out there, that it is so rare, but it is like there are still people out there. And like the fear of the unknown is, I think, what made Silence of the Lambs so good, is like, this could have been the guy next door to me, this could have been someone, versus like Spotlight, like it's pretty contained. If I'm not Catholic, this probably isn't going to happen to me as frequently. Not to say it doesn't happen in other religions. That's not what I'm implying. But like this was
the Boy Scouts.
Right. Like this is it was meant to be a very specific demographic, right? Like so, and I think that's what I really enjoyed about Silence of the Lambs. So I'm really glad that Stacy, you did it, because I think in your video you did some really good points about how like it's a very tangible fear that a lot of people have. But I think that that's what makes it interesting, is not a lot of people will ever experience it. So being afraid of something that you'll probably never experience versus like being able to have conversations about the other things that we might experience sets the kind of horror genres very differently apart.
Yeah, and that was what was kind of brilliant about Silence of the Lambs, is that people came for the cannibal, you know, they came for this thing that's never going to happen to you, right? Don't worry about it. And what Demi snuck in was everyday misogyny.
Right.
Like, you know, fears that women deal with every day.
Right.
Yeah.
And like we didn't, you know, most of us, I don't want to generalize, but, you know, probably a lot of folks don't remember that part. They don't remember that aspect. They don't remember actually facing it through Clarice Starling's eyes. You know, the other cops she works with, the guys, you know, the boss that hits on her, you know, getting on the elevator and, you know, wondering, like, sizing everyone up, like, is that guy safe? Is that guy safe? Like most women do all the time, right? So it was this beautiful, like, Trojan horse of, you know, look, serial killers, but also misogyny.
Well, that those two things are not unrelated, right? The sort of casual misogyny that she experiences taken to its extreme end, you get Buffalo Bill.
Right.
I do think we should say, because we haven't said it anywhere, I do think Silence of the Lambs is brilliant. It does belong in our discussion, but we do have to acknowledge the Buffalo Bill. Go ahead, Stacy. Your pick.
You're absolutely right. There is an aspect of transphobia and potentially homophobic, LGBTQ phobia. Jonathan Demme insisted that Buffalo Bill was not transgender, that he was just a self-hating guy who hated women.
They actually say that in this show, in the movie as well. They try to specifically say that.
But it can be read that way for sure. So yeah, it's definitely not flawless. It's not a saintly film.
Yeah, just wanted to get that in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Acknowledge it.
I think it's important that it is something to discuss, whether people believe it or not, because I think that's the whole point of the discussion, is like, this is actually how people feel, and people are transphobic and homophobic. And just because someone, you don't always, I hate shows that always, you know, the bad guy has to be some different demographic. They can't just, there's something different about them. They can't just be a quote unquote normal person. They're always, the bad guy has to have something wrong with them. But I think it kind of brought to light conversations, you know, that people started to have, like, and at the time people really believed that, you know, trans individuals were terrible and scary, and this is all a crock of lies they'd been sold, because again, fear within a movie about fear, right? Like, let me take something that's already heightened your senses and throw you something that I can now persuade you a little bit more on, because you're heightened on your fear. But I think that's the villain complex in general, right? Like, if villains aren't scary, then you aren't going to be scared. There's a reason all Disney villains are usually a different color other than a normal skin tone. There's a reason, like, villains in movies have deformities or physical disabilities, or
They have to be the other.
Yeah, they have to be something that cannot be tangible, which is what I think all of our kind of our movies show. All of our selections really, like, it could be tangible. All of, you know,
vast majority is just white straight guys.
Well, statistically, that's what it is, though. Like, most villains are white straight guys. So.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be nodding so much.
Yeah. I miss the days of, you know, pod people and aliens that were vegetable men. Like, that was what the other was. He's a giant carrot. Come to kill us.
The Thing is just a beautiful movie as well. So,
But that's the Scooby-Doo complex. The scariest villains are not the monsters. It's who's under the monster mask. Yeah. Right.
Very true. Very true. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We always have fun making these things for you. We will try to be on a more regular schedule. We do our best. Life gets in the way. I don't know when Movies That Matter podcast will resume. I'm really sorry, but I don't feel comfortable going to a movie theater, and I don't like to review a movie that I see at home on my television. So stay tuned, and we're going to keep going with Impact 10 to keep content coming in the meantime. And remember, movies matter.
And so
Do.
You.
See you all next time.